Religion defined a hierarchy before a single word was spoken. Omar Rahman stood inside his own mansion with the certainty of a man who believed God, wealth, and bloodline had aligned in his favor. Islam, for him, was not only belief. It was structure, order, a justification for why some commanded and others waited at the gate. Elizabeth Caldwell crossed that gate as a Christian teenager, with no invitation, and no protection beyond conviction. A small cross rested against her chest, not displayed, not hidden. It had been there long before this moment, long before she understood how expensive truth could become. The claim came without ceremony.
If you stand up with real Christians, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and comment from where are you watching.
Elizabeth stated it plainly to the house manager, then again to Omar when he appeared. She was not here for charity. She was not here to beg. She was here because she was the biological daughter of his late father and had a legal right to inheritance. The words cut through the silence and settled heavily in the space between them. Omar did not respond immediately. He looked at her face, then at her posture, then at the cross. His expression shifted from curiosity to irritation. The irritation hardened into something colder. Disbelief was not emotional. It was procedural. Omar asked for her name again, slowly, as if repetition alone might expose deception. He asked who sent her. He asked who had planted the idea. Each question assumed manipulation. Each question reduced her to a pawn. Elizabeth answered without elaboration. Her mother worked for the Rahman family for years. Her mother died recently. Before dying, the truth was told. No trembling voice. No dramatic pauses. The restraint unsettled him. He expected desperation. What he saw instead was resolve, and that felt threatening. The rejection arrived dressed as civility. Omar explained calmly that powerful families were frequent targets of false claims. He spoke of people inventing stories when grief and poverty collided. He framed his dismissal as experience rather than arrogance. He mentioned honor. He mentioned faith. He mentioned lineage. Islam, in his telling, was not merely belief but boundary. A Christian girl standing inside that boundary was not a possibility to be examined. It was an offense to be corrected. Elizabeth listened without interrupting. Muscles tightened, breath slowed. The humiliation was not loud, but it was deliberate. Omar spoke as if teaching a lesson meant for more than just her. This house did not negotiate with strangers. This name did not bend to stories carried in from the outside. He did not raise his voice. He did not insult directly. He did something worse. He invalidated her existence within the conversation. The tone shifted from explanation to warning. Omar stated that no such claim would ever be acknowledged. No documents would be reviewed. No lawyers would be engaged. Entertaining the idea itself would stain the family's reputation. He gestured toward the door, as if concluding a meeting that had never truly begun. The message was clear. Leave now, quietly, and accept the mercy of being dismissed politely. Elizabeth did not move. Not immediately. Standing still inside a space that wanted her gone was its own form of resistance. When she spoke, the voice was controlled but firm. The claim was not emotional. It was legal. Her mother's employment was documented. Timelines existed. Evidence existed. The truth did not require belief. It required examination. That sentence landed harder than she intended. Omar's expression tightened. Certainty does not like being challenged by someone with nothing to lose. Disgust surfaced next. Omar accused her of exploiting faith for sympathy. He gestured vaguely at the cross and implied manipulation without naming it. Christianity, in his framing, was something naive people clung to when facts failed them. He suggested she had been coached, that someone had filled her head with ideas she did not understand. The power imbalance widened deliberately. Age, wealth, religion, all pressed down at once. Elizabeth felt the pressure physically. Heat in the face, tightness in the chest, a tremor that threatened the hands. She forced stillness. Christianity had never promised safety. It had taught endurance. She did not quote scripture. She did not defend doctrine. She defended truth. One sentence only. Her mother had nothing to gain by lying on her deathbed. Omar dismissed that immediately. People lied all the time, especially when leaving nothing behind but confusion. The house felt smaller then, not because of walls, but because of control. This was Omar's territory, his rules, his version of reality. Elizabeth understood something clearly in that moment. Convincing him was never the goal. He did not need to believe. He needed to be forced to acknowledge facts later, under conditions he could not dominate. The realization steadied her. Omar ended the encounter formally. Security would escort her out. Any attempt to return would be treated as harassment. Legal consequences were implied, not stated. Reputation was weaponized quietly. Elizabeth nodded once. No argument. No last plea. The folder in her hands remained closed. Proof revealed too early would be wasted. Truth required timing. Outside the gate, the rejection settled fully. The humiliation was real. Being dismissed as a liar, an opportunist, a Christian outsider seeking contamination hurt more than anger, but it did not destroy resolve. The cross at her neck felt heavier, not as burden, but as reminder. Faith did not bend to wealth. Truth did not evaporate because a powerful man refused to hear it. Elizabeth walked away knowing something Omar did not yet understand. Refusal was not victory. It was delay. If a man controls everything inside his walls, what happens when truth waits patiently outside them? Elizabeth did not leave the gate defeated. She left measured. Each step away from the mansion was deliberate, controlled, an effort to prevent anger from turning into recklessness. The rejection replayed in fragments. Not the words themselves, but the posture behind them. Omar had not denied her because the claim lacked weight. He denied it because acknowledgement would fracture control. That understanding settled quickly and stayed. The following week exposed the next layer of resistance. Letters went unanswered. Calls were redirected. Legal inquiries met polite silence. Omar did not engage directly again. He didn't need to. Power functions best when it appears absent. Instead of confrontation, Elizabeth encountered walls. Each one quiet, each one deliberate. The message remained consistent. There would be no discussion, no recognition, no path forward unless she surrendered the claim entirely. Elizabeth met with a local attorney who specialized in inheritance disputes. The meeting was brief but sobering. Without voluntary cooperation, the process would be slow, expensive, emotionally draining. Powerful families delayed until claimants collapsed under pressure. The attorney did not sugarcoat it. Winning was possible. Surviving the wait was the real test. Elizabeth listened without interrupting. Patience was not new. Poverty teaches it early. News traveled faster than paperwork. Omar's version reached people before Elizabeth's facts did. Whispers framed her as opportunistic, delusional, a grieving girl chasing fantasy. The religious angle sharpened it. A Christian teenager challenging a respected Muslim family became a convenient narrative. Faith was used as context for dismissal. She noticed it in conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, in the way smiles thinned, in the way support turned conditional. Work suffered next. Elizabeth's part-time job reduced hours without explanation. A landlord suddenly mentioned lease concerns. Pressure arrived indirectly, dressed as coincidence. Omar never touched her directly again. He didn't need to. Systems worked on his behalf. That was the lesson being delivered. Resistance carried consequences. Silence would restore stability. At night, doubt pressed harder than hostility. Not about the truth, but about endurance. Elizabeth replayed her mother's final weeks. The exhaustion, the urgency, the insistence. Hannah Caldwell had not spoken like someone inventing comfort. She spoke like someone correcting a wrong too long ignored. That memory anchored Elizabeth when fear crept in. Faith did not remove doubt. It gave it boundaries. A second letter arrived from Omar's legal office. Polite, firm. The family rejected all claims. Any further action would be considered harassment and met with countermeasures. The language was careful, non-threatening, absolute. Elizabeth read it once, then again, then folded it neatly and placed it beside her documents. This was escalation, not closure. The decision formed quietly. Waiting for permission was over. Elizabeth authorized formal filing. Court involvement would force visibility. That visibility would provoke reaction. She understood the cost. Reputation would suffer further. Finances would strain. Isolation would deepen. Christianity did not promise reward for obedience. It demanded it anyway. The filing triggered movement immediately. Omar's silence ended, not with dialogue, but with strategy. A senior attorney contacted Elizabeth's lawyer within hours. The tone shifted from dismissal to containment, requests for delays, jurisdiction challenges, procedural objections. Every legal maneuver designed to exhaust rather than resolve. Omar was not afraid of truth. He was confident he could outlast it. Elizabeth watched this unfold without illusion. The fight was no longer personal. It was structural. Wealth versus persistence. Control versus law. Faith versus pride. The imbalance was obvious. So was a mistake. Omar assumed endurance belonged to those who possessed comfort. He underestimated the discipline forged by lacking it. Public perception hardened. Online comments appeared. Anonymous, cruel, confident. Accusations multiplied. Elizabeth read none of them after the first day. Attention was rationed. Energy was guarded. Prayer was not dramatic. It was repetitive, grounding. The same request each night. Strength to finish what truth started. Months passed under tension. Hearings delayed. Motions filed. Objections sustained. Omar never appeared in person. Distance maintained authority. Elizabeth appeared every time. On time. Prepared. Visible. Each appearance reminded the system that she existed beyond rumor. The imbalance began to irritate observers. Quietly, judges noticed consistency. Clerks noticed diligence. Opposing counsel noticed refusal to collapse. The narrative Omar had constructed depended on disappearance. Elizabeth refused to provide it. This was no longer about belief. It was about persistence under pressure. When power relies on exhaustion, what happens when endurance refuses to fail? The first real hearing lasted less than 20 minutes, and it still changed everything. Not because anyone declared Elizabeth right, but because the court refused to treat her like a rumor. The judge addressed her directly. Names spoken clearly. Claims summarized without mockery. Procedure explained without impatience. That small respect landed like a correction to the months of quiet humiliation. Omar's attorney tried to steer the conversation away from substance. The judge kept returning to the same point. If a claim exists, the law has a process. Process does not depend on whether a powerful family feels offended. Omar did not appear. Absence was part of the performance. Presence would imply quality. Letting lawyers handle it preserved the myth that this was beneath him. His attorneys argued that Elizabeth was harassing a grieving family. They framed the filing as opportunism. They questioned Hannah Caldwell's character without naming her directly. They suggested mental instability without saying a word. Everything stayed coded in professionalism. The intent remained obvious. Poison the claimant while pretending to protect the court's time. Elizabeth's attorney did not fight with speeches. He presented documents, employment records, pay stubs, a timeline showing Hannah's years of service, a notarized statement about Hannah's final disclosure. The judge listened without reacting emotionally. That neutrality was its own form of pressure. It meant the court was not moved by Omar's status. It meant facts still mattered. Omar's side requested continuances. The judge granted some, denied others. The case did not end. It advanced, slowly, relentlessly. That night, Elizabeth returned to her small apartment and felt the cost hit her all at once. Not fear, fatigue. It sat in her shoulders, heavy and dull. The system moved. The system also consumed. Bills piled up. A second job became necessary. Sleep shortened. Friends stopped calling. Some didn't know what to say. Others believed Omar's narrative. A Christian girl claiming a Muslim millionaire's bloodline sounded like the kind of story people enjoy mocking. Humiliation becomes entertainment when the target is poor. Omar's reach began to show itself more clearly after the hearing. A letter arrived from Elizabeth's landlord about community concerns. The wording was careful. No direct accusation, just discomfort, a suggestion that publicity was bad for the building. Elizabeth recognized the pattern immediately. Pressure without fingerprints. She paid rent early. She stayed quiet. She avoided conflict. Still, the sense of being watched grew, not by cameras, by social consequence, by doors that shut politely. At work, a supervisor pulled her aside and asked if everything was okay. The question sounded kind. The eyes were nervous. The supervisor mentioned calls from someone important asking about her schedule and reliability. No names, no proof, just the unmistakable shape of influence. Elizabeth's hours were cut again the next week. When she asked why, the supervisor avoided eye contact and said business was slow. Business had not been slow before. The lie was thin and humiliating, but it was delivered with a smile, which made it worse. Church became both refuge and battleground. Some members prayed for her openly. Others offered quiet support. Groceries left at the door. A small envelope of cash slipped into her hand with no speech. But there was also tension. People worried the lawsuit would bring attention the congregation didn't want. A few suggested forgiveness as a substitute for justice. Elizabeth did not argue. She thanked them. She went home. Faith was not passive to her. Christianity, as she understood it, was not a tool for staying small. It was a command to stand in truth, even when truth made people uncomfortable. Omar's attorneys filed a motion to dismiss on technical grounds. They claimed the documentation was hearsay. They argued the court lacked sufficient basis to proceed. They painted Elizabeth as someone searching for money, not family. The motion was written to sound reasonable. It was designed to trigger shame. If the case died early, Omar would win without ever being questioned. The judge scheduled a hearing. Elizabeth prepared for disappointment and told herself not to confuse slow justice with failure. The hearing ended with a ruling that shocked Omar's team. The case stayed. The judge stated plainly that the claim was not absurd on its face. Further inquiry was warranted. No victory declared. No celebration. Just a refusal to erase her. Omar's attorney smiled while receiving the ruling, but the smile looked strained. A crack had appeared, not in the law, in the assumption that the law would automatically bend. Retaliation turned sharper after that. A local blog published an investigation into Elizabeth's past. The writing was sloppy, but the damage came from repetition, not quality. Her mother was described as unstable. Her childhood was described as troubled. Rumors were treated as facts. Commenters used religion as insult. Christians were called ignorant, manipulative, delusional. The cross at her neck became a punchline. Elizabeth read only the first few lines before closing it. The nausea stayed anyway. The humiliation lived in the body even when the eyes looked away. Elizabeth's attorney advised caution. Everything could be used against her. Emotional reactions, social media posts, public statements. Omar's side wanted a mistake, a slip, anything to frame her as irrational. Elizabeth agreed to silence, not because silence was submission, but because silence was discipline. Christians had survived worse than gossip by refusing to trade truth for noise. She focused on concrete actions: work, court dates, documents, prayer, sleep when possible, food when available. The most painful pressure came through family memory. Elizabeth began to notice how easily people discounted Hannah Caldwell. Years of labor were treated like background, service erased, death treated as a convenient storytelling device. That dismissal cut deeper than attacks on Elizabeth herself. It felt like another theft, not of money, of dignity. Hannah had cleaned homes, raised a daughter, and died without luxury. Now her character was being shredded by people who never knew her. Elizabeth refused to let her mother be reduced to a punchline. A small break arrived from an unexpected place. A former employee of the Rahman household contacted Elizabeth's attorney quietly. No grand confession, no dramatic meeting, just a willingness to confirm Hannah's years of service and mention that the late patriarch had a private habit of secrecy. The employee refused to speak publicly. Fear was real. The system punished those who betrayed powerful families. Still, that small confirmation mattered. It wasn't proof of paternity. It was proof that Hannah had been present long enough for the claim to be plausible. Omar's side reacted by tightening control. More filings, more delays, more intimidation dressed as civility. The strategy remained consistent. Make the process unbearable. Force Elizabeth to choose survival over justice. Omar assumed Christian endurance was symbolic, something spoken about on Sundays. He did not understand it as daily practice. He did not understand that a Christian girl raised with little could outlast a man raised with everything. The war was not fought with fists. It was fought with paperwork, reputation, and fatigue. When a system is used as a weapon, what happens when the target refuses to disappear? The case stopped feeling abstract when the bills arrived in clusters. Legal fees, filing costs, transportation, missed wages. Each envelope carried weight, not panic, calculation. Elizabeth spread them across the table and counted what could wait and what could not. There was no dramatic breakdown, just quiet acceptance that endurance had a price, and it would be paid daily, not all at once. Christianity had taught her to count costs before commitment. She stayed committed anyway. Omar escalated without appearing. Influence moved through intermediaries who never introduced themselves. A zoning complaint appeared against the apartment building. Inspections followed. Tenants whispered. The landlord grew tense. Elizabeth received another notice referencing ongoing issues. The language was neutral. The intent was not. She recognized the design. Pressure that felt accidental worked best because it left no single hand to confront. The mansion had walls. Her life had seams. Court scheduling became the battlefield. Omar's attorneys requested delays, citing international travel, unavailable witnesses, conflicts that always favored postponement. Each request sounded reasonable in isolation. Together, they formed a pattern of attrition. The judge began denying more motions and granting them, not out of sympathy, out of irritation. The system disliked being manipulated as much as it disliked frivolous claims. That irritation was subtle but real. Elizabeth noticed it before anyone else did. Work collapsed next. The supervisor called her into a small office and closed the door gently. The explanation was careful. Staffing changes. Budget concerns. Nothing personal. Elizabeth nodded, collected the last paycheck, signed what was required, left without argument. Losing the job hurt less than the realization that Omar could erase stability without ever touching her. The humiliation was structural, designed, efficient. Church support grew quieter but stronger. No speeches, no public prayers that might attract attention. Just consistency. Rides offered without explanation. Meals prepared without questions. A room made available if housing fell through. Elizabeth did not romanticize it. Help carried dignity when it respected boundaries. Christianity, lived properly, did not demand gratitude as currency. It offered solidarity without ownership. Omar's narrative hardened publicly. Articles framed Elizabeth as stubborn, obsessed, unwilling to move on. Commentators mocked the idea that truth mattered more than peace. Faith was reframed as pathology. A Christian insisting on justice was painted as intolerant, disruptive, unwilling to accept cultural boundaries. Elizabeth watched that language spread. She understood it. When truth threatens comfort, the truth teller becomes a problem. A turning point came quietly. The judge ordered limited discovery. Not dramatic, not accusatory, just procedural. Documents related to the late patriarch's personal finances and employment records would be reviewed. Omar's legal team objected immediately. The objection was sharp, almost emotional. That reaction was noted. Elizabeth felt it like a shift in air pressure. Something mattered behind those files. Omar finally appeared in court after that order. Not to testify, to observe. The presence changed the room. Not because of fear, but because of expectation. He sat composed, expression controlled, eyes never resting on Elizabeth. The message was clear. This was still beneath him. The judge acknowledged him without ceremony. No deference. No hostility. Equality unsettled him more than opposition would have. Elizabeth did not look at him. Attention stayed on the process. She had learned that eye contact invited games. This was not personal theater. This was law. Omar's presence did not weaken her. It clarified the stakes. He had come because something was at risk. Power does not show up unless necessary. After that appearance, pressure intensified briefly, then stalled. No new attacks. No new articles. Silence replaced noise. That silence felt strategic. Elizabeth recognized it as recalibration. Omar was reassessing cost. That did not mean surrender. It meant calculation. Wealth did not fear truth. It feared exposure that could not be controlled. At home, Elizabeth reviewed her documents again. Employment records, letters, timelines. Nothing new, no miracle, just the same facts waiting patiently. She thought of her mother's voice in the hospital room. Calm, direct, not emotional. Hannah had not asked Elizabeth to win. She had asked her to try. That memory anchored resolve more firmly than hope ever could. The judge scheduled a status conference and warned against further delay. Omar's attorneys nodded. Professional, tight. Elizabeth's attorney allowed himself a small exhale afterward. Not relief, recognition. Momentum existed now. It was fragile. It required discipline. Any misstep could still collapse everything. Elizabeth walked home. That evening passed people who had read things about her. She could feel it in glances that lingered too long, in conversations that stopped half a second late. Shame pressed at the edges of her awareness. She refused it. Shame belonged to lies, not to truth pursued openly. Christianity did not teach her to absorb humiliation silently. It taught her to reject it without becoming bitter. The mansion remained untouched. Gates closed. Walls intact. Omar's world looked unchanged from the outside. That illusion mattered to him. Elizabeth understood something crucial then. The fight was no longer about inheritance. It was about control over narrative. Omar needed the story to end with dismissal. Elizabeth needed it to end with acknowledgement. Only one of those endings could survive daylight. Pressure had not broken her. It had clarified lines. When silence replaces intimidation, who is actually running out of room? The silence did not mean peace. It meant preparation. Omar's world did not collapse when pressure failed. It adjusted. Lawyers became sharper. Requests narrowed. Strategy turned surgical. The goal shifted from exhausting Elizabeth to discrediting the foundation beneath her claim. If Hannah Caldwell could be reframed as unreliable, everything else would follow. That was the angle. That was the risk. A deposition was scheduled for a former household administrator, not a close ally, not a loyalist, someone mid-level, someone who had stayed quiet long enough to be forgotten. Omar's attorneys expected routine compliance. They expected memory softened by time. They expected loyalty to money. What they encountered instead was caution. The administrator answered carefully. No accusations, no embellishment, but timelines aligned. Employment records matched Elizabeth's filings. Mentions of the late patriarch's private movements surfaced without drama. The word patterns appeared more than once. That word stayed with everyone in the room. Elizabeth did not attend the deposition. She did not need to. Her presence invited intimidation. Her absence allowed facts to speak uninterrupted. When the transcript arrived days later, her attorney read it twice before calling. The voice on the phone stayed neutral, but the message was clear. Something had shifted, not enough to win, enough to expose vulnerability. Omar's legal team requested a closed session immediately after receiving the same transcript. That urgency spoke louder than denial ever had. The court ordered supplemental disclosure. Narrow, specific, financial records related to discretionary spending during the years Hannah Caldwell was employed. Omar's attorneys objected again, but the objection lacked force this time. The judge had noticed a pattern of resistance. Resistance without substance irritated the court. Discovery was not punishment. It was procedure. The order stood. Omar reacted privately, not with rage, with offense. Being questioned felt like an inversion of order. He had built a life on the assumption that scrutiny flowed downward, never up. The idea that a Christian girl with no resources could force examination into his family's past felt intolerable. He authorized compliance while instructing his team to control optics. Nothing leaked. Everything filtered. Or so he believed. Elizabeth felt the shift physically before she understood it intellectually. The pressure in daily life eased slightly. No new landlord notices. No new concern calls. No fresh articles. The silence had texture now. It felt like containment rather than attack. That change carried danger. Containment meant something was being managed. Managed meant valuable. The church noticed too. Conversations changed tone. Less worry. More resolve. No celebration. Christians who would watch quietly now offered practical help without fear. Not because victory seemed close, but because the cost of standing with her no longer felt infinite. Influence recedes when its certainty cracks. Elizabeth accepted help without commentary. Pride had no role left to play. The court scheduled another hearing to address compliance. Omar attended again. This time his composure looked practiced rather than natural. The judge addressed him directly and asked procedural questions. Simple, specific. Omar answered carefully, respectfully. The exchange was brief. But something important happened. He was spoken to, not spoken about. Equality had been enforced without announcement. Elizabeth listened without reacting. Reaction would have cheapened the moment. The system was doing what it was designed to do when not bent by fear. It was slow. It was imperfect. It was still capable of insisting that wealth submit to process. That realization settled deeper than hope. It felt like alignment. Omar's attorneys requested one more delay. The judge denied it, not harshly, casually, as if the request no longer carried weight. That denial landed harder than any ruling before it. Power depends on expectation. Expectation had failed. After the hearing, Omar walked past Elizabeth without acknowledgement. No glance, no smirk, no contempt. The absence felt intentional. Refusal to engage now looked less like dominance and more like containment of damage. Elizabeth did not look back. Eye contact was no longer necessary. The system had become the intermediary. That evening, Elizabeth reviewed her documents again. Nothing new had been added on her side. No sudden evidence. No revelation. The case was moving not because of miracles, but because of consistency. Truth, repeated without distortion, had begun to exhaust denial. Christianity had taught her this pattern long before the lawsuit. Lies require energy. Truth waits. A call came late from her attorney. The tone stayed professional, but the words carried weight. There was irregularity in the records. Not proof of paternity. Not yet, but inconsistency significant enough to raise questions about undisclosed relationships and unacknowledged financial arrangements. The kind that suggested secrecy, not generosity. The kind that did not align with Omar's public narrative of moral clarity. Elizabeth said nothing for several seconds after the call ended. She did not celebrate. She did not pray aloud. She sat still and let the meaning settle. This was a crack. Not wide, not visible from a distance, but real. The wall had been struck in the same place often enough to weaken structure. Omar felt it too. Control was slipping from the realm of certainty into the realm of risk. Risk demanded action. But action now carried consequences he could not fully command. Every move would be observed. Every refusal would be recorded. The house that had once dismissed Elizabeth as an inconvenience was now forced to account for its past. The fight was no longer about whether the claim was absurd. It was about what else had been hidden. When denial begins to protect itself, what truth is it afraid of revealing? The court did not announce escalation. It simply proceeded. That was the most unsettling part for Omar. No moral lecture, no public condemnation, just a narrow order issued with calm authority. A limited set of biological materials would be produced if voluntary acknowledgement continued to fail. The language was careful. The implication was not. The law had reached a point where certainty without verification was no longer acceptable. Omar objected immediately through counsel, not loudly, not emotionally. He framed the order as invasive, unnecessary, disrespectful to religious tradition and family privacy. The argument was familiar. Faith as shield, dignity as excuse. The judge listened, hands folded, eyes steady, then asked a single question. If lineage was beyond doubt, why resist confirmation? The room held still. Omar's attorney answered instead. Procedure, precedent, delay. None of it addressed the question. Elizabeth sat without moving. This moment was not victory. It was exposure. The system had reached a point where refusal carried consequence. The order did not demand compliance yet. It demanded explanation. That distinction mattered. It meant the court was not punishing. It was clarifying. Clarification was dangerous for a narrative built on dismissal. Outside the courtroom, Omar's posture shifted, not toward anger, toward calculation. Advisors gathered. Voices lowered. Options were weighed quickly. Compliance risked revelation. Continued resistance risked compulsion and public inference. Neither path preserved control. That loss of clean options unsettled him more than the claim ever had. For the first time, the mansion's walls felt permeable. Pressure returned to Elizabeth's life in subtler ways. A potential housing option vanished without explanation. A promised freelance job fell through. No threats, no warnings, just absence. The system was reminding her that advancement came at a price. She recognized the pattern and adjusted. Expectations lowered. Focus narrowed. The case remained central. Everything else became negotiable. Church support held steady. Not louder, not quieter. Steady. That steadiness mattered. It communicated something Omar's influence could not replicate. Loyalty not purchased. Faith not transactional. Elizabeth did not speak publicly about the case. She did not posture. She did not frame herself as victim. Christianity, as she practiced it, demanded restraint. Truth would speak when summoned. Until then, silence was obedience, not fear. Omar authorized a partial response to the court order. Documents were produced, carefully curated, incomplete by design. His legal team argued compliance while protecting gaps. The judge noticed immediately. A supplemental order followed. Firmer, less patient. The court's tone shifted from neutral to directive. This was no longer a suggestion. It was an instruction. Elizabeth's attorney prepared for the next phase without ceremony. There were no promises made to her, only explanations. If the court compelled testing, results would not be immediate. There would be chain of custody procedures, confidentiality rules, motions to suppress, appeals. Omar would fight revelation to the end. The question was not whether truth would emerge. It was whether Elizabeth could endure the final stretch. That endurance was tested when Omar requested a private settlement meeting. The request came through attorneys. Confidential, without admission, without apology. The offer was framed as generosity, financial support, educational funding, a life made easier. In exchange, the claim would be withdrawn. No testing, no ruling, no acknowledgement. Elizabeth listened to the offer and felt the weight of it immediately. It was not small. It was designed to end resistance quietly and permanently. She asked for a day to respond. That night was not dramatic. No tears, no crisis, just prayer, repetitive and plain, not for guidance about money, for clarity about obedience. Christianity did not promise prosperity for compromise. It promised peace or truth. Elizabeth slept little. The decision did not change overnight. It revealed itself. The response was sent the next morning. No negotiation, no counteroffer. The claim would proceed. Truth was not for sale. The attorney warned her once more about consequences. She acknowledged them. The message was forwarded. Omar's side replied within the hour. Settlement withdrawn. Tone hardened. Lines redrawn. The court responded to continued resistance with finality. An order was issued compelling genetic testing under controlled conditions. No spectacle. No press. Just law. The tests would be conducted. Results sealed until proper review. Compliance required. Non-compliance punishable. The system had moved from patience to enforcement. Omar read the order alone. The confidence that had defined his posture since Elizabeth arrived at the gate finally faltered. Not panic. Something colder. Recognition. He had underestimated persistence rooted in faith rather than ambition. He had assumed endurance was finite. He was wrong. Elizabeth received the same notice later that day. The paper felt heavier than it was. She did not celebrate. She sat quietly and placed it with the others. This was not the end. It was the narrowing. The truth was about to be measured, not argued. Whatever followed would be permanent. When power runs out of ways to delay, what remains but compliance with the truth it tried to silence? The waiting did not feel dramatic. It felt procedural. Elizabeth learned quickly that once the system takes over, emotion becomes inefficient. Dates were set, forms signed, instructions followed. The test itself was handled without ceremony. No confrontation, no speech, no eye contact. Samples collected under supervision. Chain of custody documented. Everything designed to remove interpretation. Truth would not be argued. It would be measured. Omar complied without comment. The posture was controlled, but the confidence that once filled it had thinned. He spoke only when required. He did not look at Elizabeth. Avoidance had replaced contempt. The mansion did not feel threatened. The man inside it did. This phase offered no stage for dominance. There was nothing to perform, only compliance. Weeks passed. The delay was technical, not strategic. Laboratories worked at their pace. Verification followed protocol. Elizabeth returned to routine. Work where possible. Church, paperwork, sleep. The mind learned how to shelve anticipation. Faith helped, but discipline mattered more. Obsession would weaken her. She refused it. Truth did not need anxiety to arrive intact. The notice came without warning. A sealed result. A scheduled hearing. Attendance required. No details disclosed in advance. That restraint mattered. It meant the system intended to reveal everything at once, under conditions that prevented spin. Omar's attorneys requested a private review. The request was denied. Transparency had been earned. The courtroom filled quietly. No press, no crowd, just parties, counsel, and the judge. Omar arrived composed, but tension showed in small places. Jaw set too tight, hands too still. Elizabeth sat upright, eyes forward. The cross at her neck rested where it always had. Not defiant, not hidden, present. The judge opened the file and read without pause. No preamble, no commentary. The language was technical. Percentages, probabilities. Scientific certainty stated plainly. The conclusion followed immediately. Paternity confirmed. Not suggested. Not ambiguous. Confirmed. The room did not react. That absence mattered more than noise. No gasp. No outburst. Just a shift so complete it felt physical. Omar's attorney looked down. The posture collapsed inward. Omar did not move at first. Then color drained from his face. The man who had dismissed a claim as fantasy now sat confronting a fact that required no belief. Elizabeth felt the confirmation settle slowly. Not relief, not triumph, recognition. Her mother had told the truth. That mattered more than inheritance ever could. The weight in her chest did not lift. It redistributed. Grief and validation intertwined without spectacle. She kept her hands still. The judge continued. Legal consequences followed naturally. Rights established. Proceedings scheduled. Inheritance to be addressed according to statute. The law spoke without anger. It did not punish arrogance. It corrected it. Omar listened without interruption. The authority he had wielded so easily now belonged entirely to the bench. When the hearing ended, Omar stood unsteadily. The man who had once framed faith as boundary now faced a boundary he could not cross. Lineage had spoken without permission. Christianity had not demanded belief. It had demanded truth. That truth had arrived intact. Outside the courtroom, no one rushed Elizabeth. No cameras. No microphones. Just quiet acknowledgement from those who had watched her endure. Some avoided her eyes. Others nodded. Respect did not announce itself. It appeared where dismissal had lived. Omar did not approach her. He left through a side exit. The mansion would remain. The money would remain. But the certainty would not. A Christian girl he had dismissed at his gate had forced his world to acknowledge what he could not control. That acknowledgement could not be undone. Elizabeth walked out into ordinary daylight. Nothing looked different. Everything felt permanent. She did not smile. She did not cry. She placed a hand over the cross briefly, then let it fall. Faith had not made the truth. Faith had carried her long enough for truth to speak. When truth finally stands on its own, what power remains in denial? The ruling did not change Elizabeth's life overnight. That myth belonged to people who thought justice arrived with applause. What changed was quieter and more permanent. The question of legitimacy ended. No more whispers framed as concern. No more polite doubt. The system had spoken in a language that did not care about wealth, religion, or reputation. Paternity confirmed. Rights established. The truth no longer needed Elizabeth to defend it. Omar retreated from public view for weeks. Statements were issued through representatives, carefully worded, respectful of the court, empty of accountability. He did not apologize. He did not acknowledge Elizabeth by name. Silence was the last refuge of pride. The mansion gate stayed closed, but the meaning of those walls had shifted. They no longer represented unquestioned authority. They represented something that had been breached by fact, not force. Inheritance proceedings followed procedure, not emotion. Numbers were calculated, assets identified, shares allocated according to law. Elizabeth listened more than she spoke. Money was discussed as consequence, not reward. The court did not treat her as a victor. It treated her as a rightful party whose exclusion had been corrected. That distinction mattered. It stripped the moment of spectacle and restored it to dignity. Public reaction arrived late and uneven. Some apologized awkwardly. Others pretended neutrality had always been their position. A few doubled down, insisting the outcome changed nothing about how they felt. Elizabeth did not engage. Vindication did not require conversation. Respect followed evidence, whether people admitted it or not. Christianity had taught her that reconciliation was optional. Truth was not. Church members greeted her without celebration. That restraint felt intentional. No victory banners. No testimonies. Just space. That space allowed grief to surface properly. Hannah Caldwell's name was spoken without defense now. Her work was acknowledged. Her sacrifice recognized. Elizabeth felt that restoration more deeply than any legal award. Her mother had not died a liar. That mattered. Omar finally requested a meeting, not at the mansion, at a neutral office, attorneys present. The request came framed as closure. Elizabeth agreed after prayer and counsel, not for reconciliation, for completion. When Omar entered, he looked smaller, not physically, structurally. The certainty that had once insulated him was gone. He spoke carefully. He acknowledged the ruling. He did not apologize. Pride still held ground where humility should have lived. Elizabeth listened without interrupting. When her turn came, she spoke once. She did not accuse. She did not preach. She stated a fact. Humiliation had been unnecessary. Resistance had prolonged damage. Truth would have arrived regardless. Omar absorbed that without response. There was nothing left to argue. The meeting ended politely. Nothing meaningful passed between them. That, too, was fitting. Life recalibrated slowly. Housing stabilized. Work resumed. Education plans reopened. Elizabeth did not rush into displays of success. She understood something clearly now. The story was not about becoming wealthy. It was about refusing erasure. Christianity had not elevated her above others. It had anchored her long enough to stand when standing cost everything. The mansion remained a mansion. Omar remained wealthy. The world did not invert itself to reward endurance. But hierarchy had been corrected where it mattered. A powerful man had been forced to submit to the same verification as anyone else. A Christian girl had not been erased. The system, imperfect and slow, had functioned when persistence met truth. Elizabeth visited her mother's grave alone one afternoon. No speech, no tears, just presence. She told Hannah the truth had held. That was all. The cross rested against her chest as it always had, not a symbol of conquest, a reminder of obedience. Some stories end with triumph. This one ended with restoration. Dignity returned. Names corrected. Lines redrawn. The invasion had failed. The House of Power had been forced to acknowledge a truth it tried to mock into silence. And when the noise finally faded, one fact remained untouched. Truth does not need permission. It only needs someone willing to endure long enough for it to speak. Truth survived because someone refused to stay silent. Stories like this only reach others when readers choose to pass them forward. Backhand Index Pointing Right subscribe to support narratives that defend dignity, faith, and accountability. Speech Balloon, leave a comment sharing your reflection. Would you have endured the pressure, or would you have walked away?